welcome to our open seminar. This is a very new thing for us. It's the first time that we are doing a live stream on YouTube for the seminar. And we were rehearsing this for the last 2 or 3 seminars, and it finally happened today. So we're very happy that this is happening today, and we appreciate that you are watching us through YouTube. And so just I want to remember that we are running a few minutes late because the RGCS board was having a monthly board meeting that just ended now. And some of our members are joining now. And we shall start in, I don't know, in a couple of minutes, 3 to 5, 4 minutes at maximum. So again, thanks a lot for having us. And I will already leave the, our PPT ready to guide our debate. There you go. There you go. So I was mute. I was talking, I was mute. Hello, Aurari.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you today?
Good, good. Thank you. How are you?
Fine, thanks.
Okay. So Aurora, I'm gonna make you a host so you can help to welcome people in the meeting, as we probably should get starting.
Okay.
Is that okay? Okay. So yes. So I think it's okay if we can start our seminar. So first of all, I like to thanks. There are a lot of people to thank today, and first of all, our 2 guests, Ilaria Mariotti from the Polytechnic of University of Milan, and Janet Merkel from the TU University of Berlin. And also, I just heard that she's also in another teaching position. And of course, also we'll have plenty of time to do the introductions. But this is all a first thank you and welcome, and to our open seminars. Also to everybody that is in our seminar today, both here at Zoom and also in the YouTube live streaming. Again, it is a really pleasure. It's the first time that we are trying to do this, and hopefully it will work. We have been rehearsing this live stream for the last 2 or 3 seminars, and we finally were able to make it work today. So thank you for everybody that is watching us on YouTube. And well, let's get to it. So the theme that we are going to discuss today is co-working spaces and their urban context, communities around streets. And the main idea here is, I think, is to see and to debate how these communities of co-workers, co-working spaces managers, how this specific community of collaborative, of one type of collaborative work practice are dealing with the way they are inserted into their neighborhood, into their urban context, into their city. What does the city makes for the co-working community, and also what the co-working communities do for the city. So what we will do is the agenda for today is this one, and we'll have up to 50 minutes for general introductions, and then we'll have a more long session about common questions. So we spared we choose it 4 questions to debate about this general topic more specifically, but also bringing our personal not personal point of view, but also what we learn from our research and our activities studying the co-working communities in our context. So Ilaria study co-working communities in Italy, and Janet study co-working communities in Germany, and of course I study communities in Brazil. And we'll try to make a comparative point of view on these questions from our different urban perspectives and see what do we have in common, what we have not, and so on. And after that, we'll have a final part. There'll be an open debate where we hope that everybody engage and ask questions and share point of views and share other experiences. This is why we're here today, to make a great and open and collaborative debate. Okay, so let's get to the introduction part. And I want to pass the word for Ilaria to introduce herself and talk a little bit about her research and about what she's doing. Again, thank you for joining us, Ilaria. It's very good to have you here.
Okay, thank you very much. And Emannuel, thank you for inviting me, and thank you also to the RGS that I'm also started recently to follow and to join. I'm from DASTU, Polytechnic of Milan. I'm an urban and regional economist, and since last year I became chair of a cost section, new working spaces and the impact on the periphery, which involves 29 countries and about 100 researchers and stakeholders, so co-working managers or also policy makers. The cost section has been, the research we are doing on the cost section has changed in the last few months due to the COVID, because as everybody can imagine, the most important aspect of co-working spaces is the community, and community needs face-to-face contacts. So we are recently also via our website or also our Facebook page, we are organizing webinars discussing about the effects of COVID on new working spaces as concerns the business model, but also on the co-workers. So here you can see the website of our cost section, and for all information you can also contact me and all the others. So I think yes, we can go on with Janet.
Okay, so yes, Janet, please. Again, thank you for being here today with us, and please introduce yourself to our fellow colleagues.
Okay. Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me and for organizing this. Goes to Emannuel, but also to RGCS. In this kind of new format, I guess. We are in the middle of teaching now, so we got used pretty quickly to, live streaming from our living rooms. So that's a new thing. I'm an urban sociologist. That's sort of my background. This is where I did my PhD. And I'm currently holding 2 positions. I just signed a contract one day before we went into lockdown to become a professor of urban and regional economics and to run a chair at the University of Kassel. And they're based in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning. But I also still hold my position as a senior researcher at the Technical University, and again here at the Chair of Urban and Regional Economics within a planning context. So I kind of switched in the last couple of years. So ever I came back from London, where I was in sociology and firmly based in sociology, I'm now sort of within planning and doing research and teaching in urban and regional economics. And I guess that's sort of slowly but steadily trickling down into my work. I guess I spent more or less the last 10 years trying to understand co-working, understanding and observing that phenomena, right, and where it came from, and sort of through several lenses. And one of the research I'm still continuing is trying to use this notion of curation and to understand that curational model that is applied within co-working spaces in trying to facilitate interaction among the different co-workers, but also in trying to create situations, effective atmospheres that make those spaces appealing for collaborative work. And I recently also started a survey together with, or a project together with Vasilis Avdikos from the Pantheon University, who some of you might know, but also with Ignacy Capdevila from Paris, where we did a survey on co-working spaces in peripheral regions. We did that in January, and we're currently sort of in the midst of trying to analyze the data on this. And this comes out of sort of the observation that, that there is a constant rise of co-working spaces outside of the urban cores, and sort of an interest in understanding if those spaces are different, if the demographics are different, if they serve different purposes in those kind of non-urban settings, etc. I think that's sort of for me.
Okay, thanks a lot. So I'll try to make quick here. So I am an urban geographer. I'm currently a PhD candidate in territorial planning and socio-environmental development. And here in the Santa Catarina State University, a public university here of Florianópolis. This is where I'm from. It's a beautiful island city in the southern part of Brazil. Well, my main interest is, of course, urban geography, but also the spatial practices of creative workers. That is, so this is exactly what I look in my research, spatial practices of the so-called creative class. That is, people who work in creative industries or have creative jobs. And among these spatial practices, I'm particularly focusing in co-working spaces, understanding that co-working spaces is a form of a spatial practice, or a practice of a work practice, a collaborative work practice, but it's also a practice that has impacts on the way we produce urban space. And this is where I'm most engaged with. And just to give a few numbers about why this is so important, because Florianópolis perhaps is not a very well-known city in Brazil, such as Rio or Sao Paulo or any other of Brasilia, the capital. And while we are a peripheral place in terms of Brazilian economy or anything like that, we are here in Florianópolis among the top 3 national hubs in ICT sector. And just to give you some numbers, why this is so important, we have here is the first national hub of the ICT in density of workers. We have approximately 2,500 workers for every 100,000 inhabitants. And we are the second in density of ICT companies for per inhabitants. It's almost 600 companies for every 100,000 inhabitants. So it's a lot for a city of 500,000 people. And we are also the second in the country in density of entrepreneurs per inhabitants. And just for you to understand, like at the state level, because here we are a capital of a state, the Santa Catarina state. And at the state level, these numbers correspond roughly to 75% of entrepreneurs and 80% of the jobs generated in the ICT sector in the state are concentrated in Florianópolis. So it is a very large hub. It is a very important technology hub for the country. And as a consequence, we have 7 co-working spaces for every 100,000 inhabitants. It is the highest density of co-working spaces per capita in the country by far. Indeed, is up to the double of the density of the second city. So co-working is also a reality for us, and this is why I decided to go deep and try to understand what this practice do for us, right? Again, this is just like a small introduction of my part, and so now we pass to this second part of our seminar, which would be common questions. So what we actually planned to do here is Ilaria, Janet, and we discussed this through email in the previous weeks. We came to 4 common questions, 4 common issues about co-working spaces and urban contexts. And we're going to explore this a little bit, these questions. Like we're going to talk about our experience, about our research, about the things we think it's appropriate about these questions. But like the main idea is to have this comparative point of view on similar questions in very different contexts. So the first question is, what do we make of co-working spaces to reflect on urban dynamics? And Ilaria, if you want to start, because I know you have a few slides to go on this, and there we go. I can pass for you as you go. Okay.
Okay. Yes. Now we talk about pre and post-COVID, pre, during, and post-COVID. No, because things are changing. Anyway. Neighborhood, first of all, according to our survey that we carried out last year in 2018, 2019 in Italy, about half of the co-workers live within 3 kilometers far from the co-working space. This means that the co-working is that the people try to find a co-working in the same neighborhoods, so they can commute less, they can live in the urban environment, because we have to consider that according to the literature, and this is also very true for Italy, co-working spaces is an urban phenomenon. Now the trend is changing. Co-working spaces are more and more open also in a second-tier city, third-tier city, but it was born as an urban phenomenon. Therefore, you can go to the co-working space walking, I mean by bike, it's in the city, and with public transportation. So the majority, so this allows to strengthen the neighborhood community if people live and work in the same neighborhood. And this way they share the sense of place. As we will see later on, indeed, co-workers and co-workers stated in our survey that the co-working space is involved within the neighborhood, organizing activities, making part of social street, and so on. The reduction of commuting, of course, is a positive in terms of sustainability because in terms of CO2 emissions, congestion, and so on. And this is especially true during the pandemic, when co-working spaces can accommodate remote and teleworkers that can, in this way, reduce commuting and the associated risks to commuting, and also improve the family and working balance. Then co-working spaces, most of the time, thanks to specific policies, are developed in peripheral neighborhoods, if we think about the city, or in peripheral areas, if we think about periphery or suburban areas. And they can have also an effect, as we will see, on the revitalization in a way of these places. Then there is the other issue that concerns the public libraries, for instance, especially in the case of Norway, for instance, Mina Di Marino and La Pintia wrote about this. So there is also the issue of public co-working spaces in public libraries that are developed in order to reduce the commuting, for instance, in the case of Norway, of people to the city center. No? So these people in a smart working or teleworking can work some days a week in a public co-working space or in semi-public spaces like coffee shops. This might be also an alternative, good alternative for in this period of COVID, because in this way people can stay to work in their city, in their village, without commuting, and also without working from home, because as we will see later, now there is also literature say that the first place, the house, the home, is not the best place where to work. You don't have the best atmosphere due to the fact that you don't have a space. I mean, my kitchen now, you have children's noisy. Fortunately, now they are out, and so you really need a place where to work, and a co-working space can be an alternative. That's it.
Nice. And Janet, do you want to go on and comment or say what do you think about this?
Yes, I also have a couple of points. I guess one of the most dominant lenses through which I try to capture what co-working is of course the labor lens. And so for me, co-working spaces represent changes in labor markets in general, but in urban labor markets in particular, with the rise of freelance work, forms of self-employed work, so what we capture as independent work, and increasingly remote work, which is more for employees from bigger companies. And this ties into general developments we see in the last 40 years, with this sort of structural change from Fordism to post-Fordism in our economies, with the rise of the service economy, the knowledge economy, etc., where we find the rise of flexible work practices, the individualization of labor and labor processes, as Emannuel Costa called it so famously, and of course also the rise of lots of different types of atypical and precarious employment. And one particular form is also the rise of freelance work and self-employed work. And this has been accelerated with the new information and communication technologies we see since roughly 20 years, sort of taking hold in the world of work. And this has significantly changed basically when people work, where they work, right? And also what they work. And brought up lots of new sort of professional fields, etc. So for me, the emergence of co-working spaces, it has a lot to do with the need to cope with those structural conditions of those urban labor markets, and to work through that freelance work situation, and all those disadvantages that exist around a freelance work situation, but also around the economic crisis that we had 2007, 2008, that started with the financial crisis, and where people sort of started actually really getting into co-working spaces, where we saw a huge wave of people going into freelance work. And where co-working spaces became a sort of answer, a help, a coping structure for those freelance workers, and provided them with crucial resources that helped them to sustain the livelihood of a freelance worker in a very volatile, highly mobile, and quite fragmented labor market. So labor is a lens for me to think through working conditions that we have in cities nowadays, but also to understand the specific characteristics of work situations, of the freelance work situations. And it opens up another question, and that is sort of the one of new geographies of work, right? And the speciality of work, and all those different type of spaces in which work happens nowadays, as work becomes more fragmented into on-demand tasks, stretches over multiple sites, and is always with people through the information and communication technologies, right? So the notion of a workplace as a spatial and temporal locus becomes redesigned in that sense. And also those individualized modes of work, as we find with freelance worker, blur distinctions between spheres of production, spheres of reproductions in cities, as homes, cafes, restaurants, parks, or stations become workplaces, and as workers are constantly locked in. So for me, talking about labor also ties in with the broader economic changes in cities, but not just there, and into what Alan Scott called, the rise of the cognitive cultural economy, and highly skilled workers, high technology sector that sort of thrive on inner city ambiances. Another lens, I have to pause once in a while because my internet connection is not the strongest, or rather more people are streaming. It's getting late afternoon here. Another lens would be to look through the innovation, and to think through co-working spaces as part of those new types of innovation spaces, such as maker spaces, incubators, accelerators, biohack labs, that are created in cities all over the world and can be considered part of this new urban innovation complex, as Sharon Zukin just called it in her new book. And where co-working spaces are framed around this notion of chance encounters, which is seen as vital for facilitating co-creation, networking, but also, and crucially, innovation. And where we can also see that those spaces have become already very well used policy tools for introducing innovation and entrepreneurship agendas in those cities. And they also have become a fixture in urban planner toolboxes, which I'm always surprised about, because I never need to talk with urban planners about what is co-working, because they actually all know and have taken it up So I guess those are my couple of points here.
Very nice. Yes, very interesting. And somehow I think that what I'm going to say kind of corroborate a few points that you two brought up. So I wanted to start actually by sharing what I understand by space, because okay, while it may seem very meticulous on my part, but I think that this is a word, space is a word, as a concept that is so intricate in our vocabulary, and especially in the lexicon of urban scholars and researchers, that sometimes I think we tend to use it automatically, like something inherent. Yeah, space is a space. You don't have to discuss what it is. But I believe that the concept of a space from the perspective of urban geography, human geography, allow us to think interesting things. And the first thing is to see space beyond just merely as a stage in which we have social actions, in which we have work practices and social actions and social relations are materialized. I mean, for a geographer, the space is not just about the actions and practices that may or may not happen. But above all, I think the analysis is about the consequences that these practices and actions both generated over time or can generate for the future of the space, of a particular space. And consequences that can be political, economic, cultural, social, and you can name it. So from this point, I believe that we can see the relationship between co-working space and urban dynamics, as much as the unfolding of demands related to the practices of a specific group of workers and all that and all that comes with it, as you were trying to explain a little bit, but as well as a thread of the spatial organization of these workers. So, for example, for instance, in the interviews I conducted with owners and managers of co-working spaces here in Florianopolis, from my perspective here, I noticed that these demands and these trends, they are quite clear and they're quite objective. There's not a lot it's not a very broad and abstract thing. I think that at least I interview with co-working managers here, and they have it that pretty clear in their heads. So the demand is for flexible and smart workplaces to be located in some very specifically densified areas of the city. As I said, we have the highest density of co-working spaces per capita of the country, and nearly the 40 spaces that exist in Florianopolis, 1/3 is located in downtown, which, of course, due to all aspects related to the flow of people and businesses and everything that happens in downtown, 1/3 of co-working spaces are located in downtown. 1/3 of co-working spaces is located in a region of the city whose radius should not exceed 3 to 5 kilometers. It's a very dense area, and is the region between the two large universities in the city. So it is arguably where we have a high concentration of students and young professionals. And here I remember what I said at the beginning: Florianopolis is a national hub for ICT, and is a very favorable environment for startups and for creative jobs and stuff like that. And the other third of co-working spaces is spread across the city. As far as I could understand, there's not a specific pattern to characterize, such as a microcluster for that matter. But there's a clear demand for this, like to be located in specific parts, to be like clustered, and one co-working space to be next to another. And from this, I think that the tendency that arises from this demand, therefore, is that people here, I mean, creative people here, the creative community here, or the creative, the co-working community here, does an active search to concentrate life where it is. So the idea that this selective clustering of co-working spaces allow us to consolidate a new way of living, a new way of living, or I mean, a livability that is compact, that is smart, that is sustainable. And this kind of discourse, this kind of narrative was unanimous among my interviewees. Indeed, many of them have assumed that this is an aggregated value to their business. Like, I sell my co-working space as something that you can make your life where it is. You can live next to your work, and you don't have to commute a lot. And so this discourse is very strong here. And that's it. I mean, I think that for my part here, what I see, and again, I'm speaking from a very specific place, a medium-sized place that which the local economy is very turned to ICT, into technology, into innovation. But overall, that would be the two couple of points that I'd like to bring: the demand for being located and the tendency to consolidate a new way of living, a new way of producing a more localized dynamic for reproducing a life. So I think that would be my two key points. And well, passing to the second question, which we now are going to try to see how this goes, both like from the co-working manager's perspective, and the third question is going to be around the co-worker's perspective, and try to see what this balance looks like. And again, I will pass the word to Ilaria, and please continue.
Yes, if you can go on the other slide just to show, thank you, the graph. So this is not so much the manager, co-working manager perspective, but the co-workers perspective, because we sent the survey to co-workers. And what we found in Italy, nowadays there are about 600 co-working spaces that, as I said, are mainly concentrated in big cities, big and medium-sized cities, but there is also an increasing interest for, as I said, smaller cities. In the webinar we did yesterday, there were some real estate agents, and they said, and for instance, there were also co-working managers of large co-working networks. They are indeed investing also in smaller cities, even in Italy. Anyway, when we asked to the co-workers about the effects, the indirect effects, let's say, of the co-working spaces on the surrounding, 85% of the respondents, that were 326, said that the perception was a positive perception, that the co-working space has had a positive impact on the urban context. In terms of revitalization of the neighborhoods, I mean, it's an issue of demand and supply. So there is a demand because in that area, and thanks to the co-working space, people are going. No, the co-working space attracts co-workers, but since a large share of co-working spaces organize events, they attract also other people during, for instance, the evening. Therefore, there might be an impact, an effect on the neighborhood with the revitalization, for instance, of services that are located there, or with the opening of new services. Then the co-working spaces have an effect on the neighborhood because they organize cultural events, because they have agreement with the local services. They organize sensitizing events, They join Social Street. The GAS is the Ethical Purchasing Group for instance, bio food. And this aspect about concerning the events organized by the co-working spaces is very much related to the fact that in our analysis as concerns Italy, but also the literature now agrees about this, about 75% of co-workers belong to the creative industry. Therefore, it's a part of the business now, organizing events and so on. When we made a counterfactual analysis comparing co-working, the results of co-workers working in pole areas, central areas, and co-workers in peripheral areas, we found that the positive effects are higher in peripheral areas. So co-working peripheral areas have had a much broader and positive effect on the surrounding. Therefore, this means that the co-working space can really enhance the development also of peripheral areas, increasing the entrepreneurship, also increasing the innovation. What Heike Meyer, for instance, when she speaks about social slow innovators in peripheral areas, so they can really be an engine to boost the peripheral areas, to boost also the places that don't matter, as Andres Rodriguez Pose pointed out. And this is also more true in this period of the pandemic. If we wanted to summarize the effects that we call indirect effects, because we can have direct effects on the co-worker, so on the workers, but then we can have also indirect effects on the surrounding. So the indirect effect on the surrounding can improve the attractiveness of the neighborhood, the development of spontaneous aggregation in the neighborhood, the districts, but also the episodic transformation in the public space. For instance, permanent temporary installation, new equipment, and so on. Then we can have effects on the practices. So, for instance, contribution to the development of innovative services. We can't forget that some co-working spaces are also incubators. So, there is a huge variety, huge typology in our cost section. The first deliverable managed by Gregor Micek was right about the typologies of new working spaces. So we also have co-working spaces hosting incubators for startups and innovative firms. And then, as we said, the effects about the environment and the planning in terms of reduction, for instance, of pollution, commuting, and so on. So the effects of co-working spaces are very, very relevant as concerns the co-workers themselves, that as also previously both of you said, underlined, they are freelancers, they are autonomous workers. So, and in our analysis, what we found is that, as we will see now, the effects are positive for these freelancers in co-working spaces. The performance, the economic performance is positive, and there is also an impact on well-being of these co-workers. So the effects, I mean, in general, are rather positive, and there are differences now between co-working spaces in central areas, in pole areas, and peripheral areas. Probably because in pole areas there is more competition. In the peripheral areas, they really can be considered an alternative to foster the entrepreneurship, the local development, but also can be an alternative for the needs, for instance, that the young people that don't work, don't study, and so on. Okay, thank you.
Very good. Very good. Janet?
Well, let me start by saying I think this is a highly, highly relevant question that we actually only addressed little so far in co-working research. It seems the dominant approach is to study the communities of co-workers and to understand the spaces through the ethnographic approaches from the inside, than rather really looking at those intersections with the surrounding areas, with the neighborhoods. So far I would say we sort of look into the different types of economic, social, or cultural relationships, and the type of economic impact those spaces might have. So in my research, what co-working managers have said, and I would say I'm more with smaller independent spaces. So, you know, you have to sort of contextualize it, those points in that, is that all of them basically assume that they add to the livability of a neighborhood, or what we might call Boston economic geography. And they explain it's because they bring people in from different parts of the town and also at different times, you know, so they create circulation. As a business, they support economic diversity in the area, and they signal activity, which can be very important. Sometimes they even take over empty storefronts, which is crucial, but they also buy services and goods from local companies, so they bring revenue to the area. That would be an important economic relationship. And some even have those coffee shops as an interface with the neighborhood, so people can actually pop in and look what's going on and what this is about, and start to engage with people through that. And through that also take on the role of a social hub. That is mentioned quite often, that hosts or managers see themselves as a social hub for the neighborhood. And some, but not many, even give their space to community groups from the neighborhood, so they can use the space at night or on weekends when they would not run their events, right? And by that sort of strengthening ties into the local communities and sort of in working together. Interestingly enough, in comparison with spaces in more rural peripheral settings, they very much switch their role. And what I've seen there is that providers talk a lot about that it's very little about the freelancers who work in those spaces, but actually more about the other type of people that come to the space and start seeing things in the space they didn't know they might or they could be. They talk about a lot of that they feel their space has become a public service infrastructure and should receive public funding for that, because they provide way more than just a shared office space. They become those spaces where older people come in and ask if their computer could be repaired there, if anyone is in there could help them, or if someone could help them, you know, understanding the internet or stuff like that. Or it's just people coming in asking if they have a coffee and a piece of cake. And the reason for that is that very often in very small villages, when people start those spaces, it's the only social gathering space that is around. And they're sort of, it's less about providing a proper work infrastructure and services around freelance work, but actually becoming more of a sort of, what we would call public service infrastructure that needs to be in a particular place. Another point I find interesting, if you talk more with hosts in cities, some providers talk about that guilt of being a gentrifier, so they fear their presence and opening up a space in a certain neighborhood brings attention to it, and that they might be responsible for rent rises and for gentrification, just because they add to the appeal of the area, right? And sort of add to the buzz and bring in certain types of people that are associated nowadays with gentrification tendencies. And that is something I can hear a lot from smaller spaces. And I think we have some hints in the literature where people talk about this, that maybe co-working spaces might be responsible for that. But again, nothing really really researched well yet, I would say. Another point I also guess is important is that we really have to start differentiating between bigger spaces and smaller ones when we look into those types of questions. More the bigger spaces, and by those I mean more the international chains like WeWork, or that come to cities. They locate in classical inner city business districts, and they very much thrive on amenities such as good public transport infrastructure, restaurants, and other companies being around, and other huge companies being around. That's more of their interest. And then on the other side, there's those smaller spaces that actually go into neighborhoods, and then start really building up their relations. Really, going into the neighborhoods. However, in the end, my impression is that providers like to talk way more about what's going on inside. That's because they can't control more, and that's sort of like more what they're about, and what are the contributions to the members and how they develop their communities, because this seems way more palpable and most of concern to them, and talk actually very little or aren't really capable of sort of saying what is their value for a neighborhood, or what might be sort of their influence and impact there.
Okay, very good. Well, here in Florianopolis, I think there's a couple of interesting points that my interviews with co-working managers and co-working owners revealed, and I'll make it quick because we're kind of running out of time here, but I'll try to make this quick. As I said, compact livability is a core value for most of co-working spaces in Florianopolis. And on the contrary of large cities, we don't have like large chains of co-working here. We do have 2 or 3 spaces, the Impact Hub spaces, which is a global chain of co-working spaces, but we don't have, for example, a WeWork space here. But again, maybe because of this, what you were saying, Janet, that small co-working spaces go neighborhoods, go through the cities, within the city. As I said, like compact livability is a core value for these spaces, especially for the 2/3 of co-working spaces that are clustered in downtown or between universities. And one of the managers that I interviewed, he even said that he discourages prospects who don't live near to his space from going to work there. And his argument is very curious about it, and I'll quote him. He said that, the person is going to be stuck in traffic for hours to get there, to get here, and the person will arrive already pretty much stressed, and then perhaps it's raining on this day, perhaps we ran out of a coffee on that day, or there is a problem with the internet, and the person will get increasingly angry, and the person will say, damn, this place sucks, I don't want to work here anymore, you have your service is not good. And like he said, actually, I want to improve my client's quality of life. I don't want to mess this guy life even more. So that's why I really discourage this type of situation in my co-working place. And I think that this quote, this specific quote, pretty much sums up the overall feeling of the managers, co-working managers and co-working owners about the role of their co-working spaces to their neighborhood, or to a broad sense of creating urban dynamics. And well, I think that's it for now on my part. I think that while, I mean, another point that it would be that while at least the interviews I did don't show a lot of reliable indicators that the spaces are concerned, the co-working spaces, they are concerned to do a full integration with the neighborhood and with the people that live in the neighborhood, like not only the co-workers, but also the small business, the small retails, or small or large companies around. Like I don't see that much of a connection. But on the other hand, I see that as a business, for the business model, the co-working spaces, they are indeed concerned. The co-working managers, they are indeed concerned to offer a service or to be able to receive people that are willing to be there, because it's close, it's easy. They want to be there to facilitate their client's life. I think that's what really highlights about how these managers perceive how their spaces interacts, because like they want to attract people from the neighborhood or from close neighborhood, like not from the other part of the city. And I think that's it's an interesting issue to think about how from the business model perspective, and it really affects the way that the specific neighborhood or specific area of the city will grow, will develop. As I said, like we have 2/3 of co-working spaces here concentrated in two very specific and small parts of the city, which is downtown and between universities. So I think this is it. And unfortunately, we are running out of time. So I think that we can advance to the third question and leave the last one to the big debate, so we can also gather other point of views and other sharings, because it's a very broad question. But for the third common thing, we will talk more about the specificities or the demands that emerge from co-workers communities. So how co-workers, how the people that rent a place in co-working space or go to a open co-working space, what is this person demand, or what is this community demand? And again, Ilaria, if you want to start, I'm sorry, I just have to ask that we are kind of running short of time to promote the open debate. So, just if you can.
Okay. Yes. Okay. In order to analyze the specificity from co-workers communities in our survey, we tried to ask co-workers about their perception in terms of the proximity typologies, whether they had exploited in the co-working spaces the proximity typologies a la Boschman. Ron Boschman from Utrecht University spoke about the proximity measures, no? That I mean, the social proximity is very much related to the Marshallian industrial district. Okay, so he discussed and worked on the typologies of proximity, and we tried to understand whether within the co-working spaces co-workers shared social proximity in terms of trust and new friends. And 74% of the co-workers had experienced a relationship based on trust. Institutional proximity, so a way of living and the political ideas, 73%. cognitive proximity in terms of the level, their level of experience, and 61%, and then 86% organizational proximity in terms of, because they use the services and facilities offered by the co-working space, including also training courses. So from these results confirm that the key role of the sense of community within the co-working space, which enhance also the opportunity to share the knowledge spillover, and the opportunity to of new business, of new opportunities to develop the business. What else? We also asked the expectation and the perceived advantages, and they what we found is that they perceived more than they were expecting. Of course, there is a bias because in this survey, because the co-workers that are answered were still working in the co-working space. Perhaps people that were not happy just left the co-working space. But anyway, I mean, this percentage are quite not strong. Then what we found is that 39% of the co-workers and 29% of the firms working in the co-working space experienced revenues increase, and almost the majority were satisfied, so life satisfaction had showed a life satisfaction with working in the co-working space. Then we also ran a counterfactual analysis, and again we found that being located in a peripheral area for a co-worker may represent an opportunity to earn more than if he or she was working in an urban center, in an urban area. So we also found that working in peripheral areas has an impact both in the economic performance and also in the well-being. Okay.
Very interesting. Janet, if you want to.
Well, I guess I'm echoing a bit what Ilaria just said. So what I find again and again is, as a main motive for people to actually join a co-working space, is the fact that their individualized work situation means they lack crucial social dimensions of a workplace, and they're looking for informal conversations with colleagues, mutual support, and a sense of belonging. And this is sort of like what then always come up, what they expect of the co-working space and the people and the community in it. So they always mention they look for social belonging and integration. And the reason for that is also, you know, if you don't have a regular workplace you're going to when you're a freelance worker, it's quite hard to construct a stable work identity. And because you have no attachment to certain types of organization, and then it's also difficult continuity. It helps them very much to actually create that by going to a co-working space. They also look for strong help and support networks. That's mentioned a lot, you know, whether it's concerning professional support, but also a lot of emotional support and care for each other. They also look for recognition, so peer-to-peer recognition, as a source of self-worth, but also professional identity. So being recognized and acknowledged as a designer, as a programmer, or whatever brings a lot of benefit to them. But then it's also forms of mutual help and even solidarity that sort of rise out of those communities. There are a few examples where co-workers started setting up mutual funds to help each other in situations of crisis, or even to start lobbying for some political change. And they're also looking for what Ilaria here calls the sense of community, so the sense of a collective identity they wanted to have. And I also find it interesting to see now in the pandemic, many spaces basically shifted their communities online and managed to do so and started setting up online lunch hours, meet up groups. They helped each other in how to set up their home office, in troubleshooting in the home office. So they basically continue to see each other, to help each other, but just on a different medium. And to end, I want to highlight a point I think we also still not addressing very much, and especially if we think about those communities and their demands. And that is the point, whether those co-working communities are actually reproducing social inequalities, right? And to think through that. Because the whole narrative of co-working communities is all about like-minded people. It's about very often perceived as a club good by people, as a membership good, or as a members club. And community, while it usually sounds, or it is also used in this way as something that is inherently good, it doesn't necessarily need to be, right? And there's hardly any acknowledgement of potential lines of inequality that run through co-working spaces. And no one really questions whether co-working spaces are actually open for everyone, right? They always describe themselves as open, as inclusive, but there might be many mechanisms one could think of, like money. If you have to pay to be part of it, that might be a huge exclusionary mechanisms. But there's also hints for race or for gender and even for race that are not acknowledged nor studied yet. I heard a lot while I was in the US from co-workers when they said, this space was too wide, it was too male, and it was too tacky. And this worked sort of as a reason to not join those spaces or to leave one. And we see there's more and more spaces popping up that serve very particular groups. So the Wing as a very successful co-working chain that only caters to female entrepreneurs. There's a rise of Black female co-working spaces, and also sort of Black incubators we see in Atlanta popping up. There was recently a paper by Colin Lawn who talked about the openness within social innovation spaces like the Hub in London, and very much criticized what is going on. So I think we should also need to develop a focus on that.
Very interesting, very interesting. Oh, sorry, I forgot to show the other slide, but I think that you pretty much summed it. Well, me again, I bring an interesting answer that appeared in my research, in my interviews. So a manager that I interviewed, he said to me that most people, even his family and his friends, don't understand what he does. They don't understand what a co-working manager does. So what he says is that, he said to me, what I say to these people is that my company is like a hotel, and I'm the manager of this hotel. But instead of hosting tourists, I host a small business and individual workers. They can be spoiled customers, they can be great customers, but what I do is just make sure they have everything on hand always. And this is a very, very interesting quote, because one thing that became remarkable among the interviews here and among the co-working spaces that I have visited is that co-working spaces, at least here in Florianopolis, they often serve as an Airbnb for small companies who want to cut costs, rather than a space where individual workers and freelance workers will share a workplace and will create a community. And well, while I still don't have a lot of data on the spirit of coworkers in this regard, because I would be doing this kind of a data collection and it was sadly interrupted by the pandemic, I think that these accounts, actually, I think this says a lot about how managers see the demand from the coworkers, and indeed how co-working managers see their jobs. And again, from a geography perspective, it says a lot to what kind of urban spaces we're building. So for instance, another manager said to me that a couple of large, very large real estate developers, local real estate developers, approached him to understand how this kind of environment works, how this kind of is collaborative, everything shares everything, everyone shares everything, and how this kind of stuff actually happens. Because these developers, they are indeed interested in perhaps adopting some kind of another type of building, building another offices, and this may have an impact on real estate. This may have impact on construction. And actually, there is a co-working space here, at least one that I can recall, that is located in a building like a regular commercial building that doesn't have traditional offices with walls and doors. Okay, you run out of the elevator and there's just a whole space, and you can just adjust. You can like make temporary walls, glass walls preferably. And so this manager of this space said to me, yeah, well, so here in the second floor we have like 3 small companies. This one they have 4 employees. This one they have 15. This one is just like these 2 guys, and the other side of this floor is still empty. You see there's nothing here, but we are negotiating to bring another client here, and he will and it's like, and that's it. The guy pays the rent and has it. Once he's done with it, because of course we have a lot of startups here, and maybe startups they don't want to afford for an office, their own workplace in the first years of operating. So they can be there, stay there for 2, 3, 4 years, and then go out and have their own office. But it does have this kind of it's very intense. There's this kind of circulation around, and I think this is an interesting spatial perspective. That it's actually a demand of the co-workers. Like they want this kind of environment, at least here. And another point that I think is worth mentioning, and it was also unanimous among the co-working managers I interviewed, is the fact that they see that creating a sense of community, like promoting exchange, collaboration, networking, is important. Yes, it is crucial, but it's not the main crucial aspect of their jobs. Like what is really a priority to them is to check if there is coffee, if the air conditioning is good, if the furniture is not damaged, like this kind of thing, like really manage the place. And I have a hunch about it. Maybe at least here, like on the contrary, what you were saying, that there is this kind of sense of community, this kind of awareness to build a sense of community. Maybe here is the opposite. I don't know, and maybe is the opposite, because co-working spaces here, I mean, the culture of co-working spaces here were created from demand for a geographically located business. Like we are a national hub for ICT. We have a lot of startups, and these startups, they are clustered in a few parts of the city, and there's a demand for co-working space here, and more than the need, or more than the feeling of we need to build a collaborative community. I think that business as usual really takes a key role here. And I mean, managers, they're both concerned with ensuring a good user experience, and coworkers themselves, they seem like to end up demanding more of this experience, this good user experience, than prioritizing connections, prioritizing community. And I'm not saying that nobody thinks about it, and actually the people think about community, community bonds. People actually, they do actively seek for this. They do this. They promote a lot of networking events. All co-working spaces I visited, they do a lot of interesting things on this topic. But it is community only for the most part. And overall, there's little interaction with the neighborhood or with the urban context. And above all, in terms of priority, I think that user experience wins the sense of community. And I think that's is a difference aspect, and it's a balance that we can open to the debate. But again, this is something that needs to be confirmed with more data on more coworkers' view. But it is something that was really stood out from the interviews with the coworking managers. And as far as I can see about the way that inside the coworking spaces, the design of the coworking spaces, the furnitures, like the aesthetics of coworking spaces, it really goes. I think it really goes through this. Like we do have like a coworking space, like this manager that said that I am a hotel manager for companies. I remember he also saying that people come to me saying they wanted to work in a co-working space, but they don't want to work in a co-working space. They want to work in a regular office that looks like a co-working space. And there's a difference. And I think this is, for the most part of my interviews, this was something that really came up, it really stood out about the co-workers' demands or co-workers' spirits or specificities for that matter, at least for, again, for the Annapolis context. And I don't know, it's something that we can debate, but we are coming to we are running out of time, but so I'd like to propose that this fourth question, the last question, like as a new work practice, how can co-working relate to future urban scenarios, which can include, of course, the post-pandemic landscape or in things related. But I think that instead of us to bring, of course, we can bring our experiences, but I'd like to take, since we are running out of time, to open this question for debate with our audience, our fellow colleagues that are here with us on Zoom, and also with everybody that is watching on YouTube. There's a chat. You can ask your question, write your feeling, express your opinion, and we'll make sure to read here. But I don't know if it's okay, maybe we can have a very quick round about it, or an opening, or we can just start opening questions. And I don't know how Ilaria and Janet feels about it, but I think it would be a great theme, since we have expanded all these questions, maybe trying to sum up, okay, what do we do now? What's going to happen next? This could be an interesting topic to debate with everybody. But since it seems we don't have a lot of
Emannuel?
Sorry, yes.
Emannuel? Yes,
I guess it's Francois who is talking to me, but I can see you, Francois.
Yes, I can.
Yes, Francois, yes, please.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
Yes, hello. So thanks a lot for your talk, great speakers, and very, very interesting. And I would have a question, because what you stress, it looks like a very global phenomenon. Co-working is a global phenomenon, and I would like to have your view about it. Isn't it a problem by itself to have these new ways of working, new ways of living, which appears as a global solution to many issues? It's an English term used everywhere. It's an aesthetic and way to organize space at the end, which looks exactly the same in all the geographical areas that you described. The relationship with the urban environment looks a little bit the same. I would like to have your view about the very starting point of all this as a global phenomenon. Isn't it a problem by itself? Is it? It's really a naive and open question, because we also know that we have to face to global issues, and that a big city or a big city probably has to face to a couple of common problems. But I would be very curious to have your view about these global roots of the phenomena you were talking about.
if Ilaria,
start?
Janet.
I mean, yes, I can start if you want. I don't know if I catch the question the right way. So how co-working also referred to this pandemic probably can be a global phenomenon. So I think that I'm interviewing co-working managers, so thanks to our Facebook page and so on. And although, according to the surveys that have been carried out, for instance, the survey by coworker.com, there is the pandemic has negatively affected the co-working spaces, and probably the smaller will not survive. But if we, when you speak to the co-working managers of larger networks, they are quite optimistic, probably because they see that as we said, even earlier, that during co-working spaces can be the third place to accommodate remote and smart workers. I mean, they can really be a solution, and they can also be a solution in peripheral areas. So I find the optimism of these co-working managers in this. Plus, also there is also the perception they also understood that they have changed their business model, and that they might offer services related to work-life balance. So we also interviewed in our webinar women co-working managers that were underlying the importance of the work-life balance, that in this period where we have kids at home is really difficult. But also other services, like, for instance, co-living or training courses for people that lost their jobs. Women, mothers have lost jobs in as percentage much 1.5 more than men. So there is this idea that we are also exploring of the neighborhood co-working space that can really help remote workers to survive, let's say.
Yes. Janet, do you want to comment on this global question?
Well, I'm still sort of chewing on it. Not sure if I have a good answer for you, Francois. But I guess it has a lot to do how it started, and sort of that it in some ways became a global movement right from the start. At least that's kind of like what I experienced, as it sort of popped up at the same time in many different locations, and those people doing those spaces quite quickly found each other to exchange information about it. I mean, there was this right, this co-working manifesto came pretty quickly in 2012 with its first ideas. So I guess that helped contribute, sort of bringing these ideas to very different corners in the world, but also might be responsible for, that it looks in a similar way. Nevertheless, I would say there are differences. And one of those is that, or the one that Emannuel just described for Florianopolis, that there's co-working has a lot to do with small companies actually being the most important demographics in those spaces. We also see that in the US. The biggest demographic now in US co-working spaces is small and medium-sized businesses. It's not the freelancer anymore, right? Which is a different issue here, for example, in Germany, where it's still very much with freelancers and self-employed people. and those, you know, and that makes for changes. And I think that also helps explain why those managers are way more about the managing at the moment, instead of, you know, facilitating interaction and working together among those freelance workers, because they target companies, and the companies have their own teams they are running, right? So they have a different type of or different expectations for the space. And that basically reminds me how WeWorks look. You know, WeWork spaces in the last 10 years changed tremendously, because also in their case, the biggest demographics are companies. Now, even huge companies like Amazon, you know, which then rents several floors in those spaces. And then it's less about building up a community or facilitating that, but rather, you know, providing the basic infrastructure for a good office space, so they are happy tenants. And then sort of the attention shifts. But I'm not sure if I gave a satisfying answer to Francois. And for this whole urban scenario thing, I guess, I mean, I already said to Emannuel in the beginning, I find it too contingent to really wrap my head around it and to really think through what, you know, what this might look like. Even also assuming that this pandemic might end. You know, there is sort of researchers who say it's going to be with us for the next couple of years, and it's coming in waves always back. So until we have a vaccine, this situation might continue. And then it's a little bit of a question, what situation will we have? Will that resemble something we knew before, or will this really be a different situation? So that's a huge question mark, I guess.
Yes, I think I agree. And actually, I'll try to answer you, Francois, from this post-pandemic situation. It's very hard to like keep guessing. Like if I could see I could foresee the future. That's not the question. But I think the pandemic is provoking a dramatic change of perspectives on a variety of things, and we'll keep doing this for quite some time at a global level. But regarding co-working spaces, I think that despite local differences that we may have, such as the one described, and Janet reinforced that, I think that in a global perspective, maybe co-working spaces in this post-pandemic scenario has a great potential to suit everyone's needs, but in different ways. Because for the freelance worker or for the individual worker, it won't have a dramatic change on the way that this person works. And okay, the pandemic's over, I will go back to my working place, or I will try to balance more the home office. But again, I think someone, I don't know if it was David, but someone, I read someone tweeting or saying that, making a question like, is working from home necessarily a home office? And I think this is another debate. It's a very interesting question that we can. It would be another part of the question, but the thing is that I think that for this perspective of individual worker, it will not change a lot. However, for companies, whether it's small, large, or big, that you need to have more than 5, 10, or hundreds of professionals working, and that you need, it's a kind of work that you can do the most part of it remotely, but still you need sometimes, some days, occasionally, you need someone who will be coordinating, who will be managing a team, a project, and you need to put people together. And there are some aspects of proximity, physical proximity, face-to-face meeting, face-to-face encounters, that I think that pandemic will not erase this. It's not like, okay, everybody now will work from home and there will be no more large companies, there will be no more offices. I think this won't be the case. And we are, of course, talking. I'm talking about just co-working space, not co-working space, but I'm talking about the kind of business that operate in the co-working scenario, right? So, and I think for these guys, for this companies, this company perspective, Maybe what I brought up about the co-working as a, let's say, more as a service, co-working as a business model, as a business service, as like this hotel that can host companies. It may be for some, maybe it could be a good opportunity to, again, reduce costs, because maybe they realize, okay, we don't need to be in a physical office from 8 to 5 every day. We can meet regularly. And also, or maybe there are, and I know here that are some IT companies here and large companies here in Florianopolis from the IT sector that they allow, and this was before the pandemic, they allow their employees to work from home occasionally, or to go to a co-working space occasionally. Actually, they pay like some kind of a quota, like, okay, so you have this $100 to spend on co-working for a month. So if you feel like you want to get out of office and you want to go to a different part of city, or you want to work in a coffee shop, or if you want to rent a co-working space for a week, feel free to do this. And maybe what we will see is that the pandemic will accelerate this process. I think this is one possibility. I don't know if I answered, but I think this is it. And we also have a question from the YouTube.
Thanks for your
sorry, Francois. Okay, I think you mentioned something, but okay. We also have a question from YouTube. I cannot understand properly. His name is MHTUM, but the question is how economically benefit the neighborhood of co-working spaces, for instance, bakers, groceries, restaurants. Like, I think the question is more about small retailers and how economically benefit the neighborhood of co-working spaces. Thinking about this kind of business, small business, is the influence on the local spending capacity measured? Interesting question, and thanks for the question. And I don't know if Ilaria or Janet.
Yes, sorry. So what's the impact on the services? Yes, on the shops, and then what else? Yes.
How economically benefit the neighborhood of co-working spaces and bakers, grocers, restaurants? And this is one question. The other question is the influence on the local spending capacity measured?
There is an impact. Sorry, my kid, if she can go out, Bianca. Anyway, yes, there is an influence because there is an increase in the demand. There are many more people around, and so there will be an increase of the supply. And then the second, sorry, I didn't catch for the second question was about.
I was muted, but I think I will paste the question here on the chat.
Yes, sorry.
Yes, so this is the question. Is the influence on the local spending capacity measured?
Okay. This is something. This is something we would like to do, but we didn't do yet. So yeah, with the survey, I mean, because then it depends. About the co-working space we are talking about. If you have a big co-working space with 300 people, of course you can imagine a higher effect. But anyway, this can be done by with a qualitative analysis, with a qualitative survey.
Yes.
So maybe no, we didn't do that yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe I can add to that. Well, to my knowledge, there is no systematic study on that. But I remember, and that's why I have this number in my head, but I can't put it to a particular study and in what context this number came about. And this is, I somewhere read that roughly 10 euros per day is spent on the local businesses by a coworker in Germany. but unfortunately, I can't recall where and in what context this was studied, because I also guess it's very different from whether you are a member of a co-working space that actually has a coffee shop and offers lunch, for example, you know, because then you're basically consuming stuff inside the co-working space and there's less need of going outside, or if it's a place, you know, that actually has not those type of services, and then you really rely on the local infrastructure. So, but to my knowledge, there is not yet a good study on that really works on those local spending capacity by co-working spaces.
Yes, yes. I think that here we have a few interesting cases. We have several co-working spaces that offer inside the co-working space, a coffee shop or a pub. I mean, there's a co-working space here that at the foreground, it's a pub. It's a coffee. There's a coffee restaurant during the day, and after 6 p.m. it becomes a pub. So there you can throw the birthday parties there, whatever you want to do. But and for the most part, is a regular coffee shop, and the way they design this coffee shop is very similar. Actually, it is a co-working place. Like, it's large tables and shared tables, and you can go there and buy a coffee and start working. And let's say you need to do an emergency meeting, and so okay, let's meet on that spot. So you go there, you buy a coffee, you get a lunch, and then you work that as if it was a co-working space at all. And in the second floor is the co-working space itself. So it's an interesting type of how to combining third spaces with co-working spaces. There are also co-working spaces that offer like small cafes, and also have this kind of display for like encouraging people to come there, and not only, okay, let's have a coffee, but encouraging them to, let's have a coffee and meet, let's have a coffee and work, let's have a coffee and study. And we have some kind of places this here. Actually, there's one pretty next to the university, so I think that it really connects to what I've been saying about the importance of localism here. And of course there are other kind of that are like co-working spaces that are located within business park. So it's a whole another type of organization that you have several restaurants and a food square, but it's another conversation. But overall, I think that for this small business part, a lot of co-working spaces, they are trying to provide this as a second product they can offer, they can sell, and also as a way maybe to attract potential customers, potential clients, like maybe potential co-workers can be drawn to rent a place to co-work, and if they do there and have a coffee and grab a lunch or have a beer there, and they say, oh, this is cool, actually I can see myself working here. And I think this happens a lot. But again, this is all perspectives on what I've studied and seen and talked to the managers of these places. I don't think, at least not here in Brazil, there's not a lot of studies, or there's no study at all. They really try to comprehend this in depth, but it's a very, very good, interesting topic.
If I can add one thing,
Yes.
in the case of Milan, for instance, in a more peripheral area, where there were buildings, previous industrial buildings, 2 co-working spaces settled in these premises, and since they were quite large and were organizing events in the evening, there has been really a development of at least 2 cafe and bars in the neighborhood. So in that case, we had really we could really see a change in the neighborhood that became more lively thanks to the events, because okay, we have to to say, thanks to the events organized by the co-working spaces, and also became more lively in general and attracted also younger people to live in the area.
So Nicholas Lynch, he raised his hand to talk. Very dear friend of mine, my supervisor for my Canadian research I did there last year. So welcome, Nick, and please.
Thanks, Manuel. A great conversation. So I was drawn to, I think it was the second question. I think it was the question around the impacts of co-working spaces to the local urban environment. And Janet had mentioned, gentrification. So I was this is maybe more of a comment or a reflection than a question, just sort of thinking about how research around this question of gentrification could or should include or maybe focus on the ways in which it's state-led. So in what way, for example, is the state using or thinking about co-working spaces as part of a larger strategy of urban revitalization and redevelopment? At which point, a lot of urban municipalities have grabbed onto the idea of maximizing surplus capacity, right? So the idea of an empty building is no longer a sustainable option. And then again, just to sort of think about the ways in which the state is a major player and a major actor in encouraging co-work spaces as part of a neighborhood revitalization. Instead of just focusing on the co-working entrepreneur or the co-working business as the gentrifier or the co-worker as the gentrifier, but again, the state as part of that practice. So again, more of a comment and a reflection than a question. Thanks.
Janet, maybe do you want to comment on Nick's comment, or no? It's just feel free.
Well, I'm fully supportive for that, so could only echo what he said. I mean, I said it a little bit in the beginning. I'm quite struck how quickly co-working has become a policy tool, but also sort of not just but also within urban planning. For example, recently we have sort of a new wave or a new phase of research in small cities, and it is very much driven by our National Ministry of Economics. And they published a couple of reports on small city living, and co-working pops up on every page as a solution for the economic future of those regions, whether as a social hub or whether in supporting entrepreneurship or bringing innovation to the region. It's incredible how this trickled down and become part of, this sort of toolkit that they apply for revitalizing, not just, cities or neighborhoods and cities, but actually sort of all over the place.
Yes, if I can add just something. Yeah, in Italy, I don't know if you read about it, but there are some municipalities in peripheral areas, also in the beautiful Sardinia island, offering incentives, subsidies to people to move to work and live there. Because the remote working is, is increasing, so people can decide to work and live everywhere. So there is also this issue of co-working and co-living in peripheral areas by the sea, very beautiful, but with a good accessibility in order to go back to the city for the face-to-face contact with the customers, and also, collaborators and so on and so forth, by plane or by train. And if I can just add what Francois said before, So perhaps, I don't know, and this is a question that I open to the floor. If the economic crisis in 2007-8 enhanced the development, the growth of co-working spaces, perhaps this pandemic, in a way, from one point of view, will increase the growth of co-working spaces, but probably in a different, with a different business model, no? So perhaps they will change. Some will die, some others will change, and some other will increase. But perhaps this pandemic, what the main, this is something we are exploring, we would like to explore. The main impact will be on location. So the main impact will be on location. Of course, now co-working spaces need to be in the city, in the large cities, because of the amenities, urbanization economies, and so on. But there is a higher demand for peripheral areas, peripheral city. But this is a question that I leave to you, to the floor, to the people, to the.
Yes. Well, I think it's very quickly as well. I think I can add to this even from our research there in Atlantic Canada, peripheral cities, Nick, because while we have seen a great share of research on creative cities or on social dynamics of the creative economy, especially in Canada and Canadian cities, and this research, they claim that there is no such thing as everyone wanting to live the loft living life, like to quote a famous concept, Sharon Zucchi concept. I think that yes, while overall research has been claiming that when you go to peripheral places, people there, creative talent there, they are not trying to live like, we need to take this place, this small place, and turn it into a new Toronto, or into a new New York, or into a new London. Like, all we have to do is embrace what we have, embrace what we are, try to promote the best of it, and maybe use this kind of urban revitalization discourse and try to promote the best of it, but knowing that we are not trying to do this. So, and I really don't know, and it's a very maybe ethic question, and I really don't know to what extent this is really like, we do want to seek this, to promote this urban revitalization without being the gentrifiers, like what Janet mentioned about the gentrification guilt, and maybe, and this is one of the part of the conversation. On the other part of the conversation, we also have seen research on peripheral places claiming that from urban policy perspective, from a development perspective, like from public policy perspective, it's quite easy. It's quite easy to capture this creative city discourse and put it like to support the strategic revitalizations of downtown areas, of central areas, which maybe it's pretty close to what we understand as a major step towards gentrification. Not necessarily that it's going to lead to, but it's a major step to going there. And so I think there's this balance between like, what is the public policy perspective on urban growth or urban revitalization or urban promoting downtown, and this is one side, and the other side there's this, that maybe in these peripheral spaces, I tend to believe, from what I've seen and talked to creative people and creative workers and creative workplaces managers, that these communities, they are somehow trying to find out, how can we do this without adopting this narrative? How can we do this without necessarily being the gentrifiers? And I think this is a very legitimate and ethic concern to have. And I do truly think that the co-working community does have this question, but I don't think that the answer is already we already have an answer. I think this is something that we have to dig on, and we have to find out and how to do this, right? I think this will be like a research agenda, I guess. Right. So we don't have more questions on the YouTube. I don't see any other raising hands on the chat. So since we passed 30 minutes from our previous time, it's we have extended this a lot. So, but again, like if there's anyone in the chat here on Zoom who wants to raise a hand and make a question or a remark or a comment, or anyone in YouTube watching, please feel free to do a last question. Or otherwise, maybe we could go through final comments, final thoughts of our guests, and yes, I think this is all for now we have. So Ilaria, Janet, if you want to make some final comments, and we can end this very productive, insightful seminar.
I'm not quite sure on. Oh, Ilaria.
No, go.
I'm not quite sure on which point I should end. Maybe on the last question we had. I think there were important structural reasons in labor market as well as in the economy why co-working emerged in the first place, and I think those will continue. So we will see a lot more of this in the future. I think those have not gone away, and I would very much support the point Ilaria said that it will look way more diverse. Not just in terms of location, I guess, but also in demographics. I think we currently see something in Asia going on, which probably will happen here too. And this is that more and more companies now use co-working spaces just because they have to also apply to those hygienic rules, right? And they don't have the own office space. So they fill up a lot of the spots in co-working spaces where freelancers actually still stay at home and don't use those. And I also guess this whole notion of you can't homework or you can't stay at home for work will completely change, because I think that's busted now, and we will see way more of this. But yeah, I think our sort of research object is not exploding or going away, but rather we will see way more of this. So thank you very much for having me.
Yes, thank you very much. I completely agree on what Janet was saying, and we are researchers and we will research this. So hopefully in a few months we will have the first results of the impact of COVID on co-working spaces, and then we will have a new wave. And let's hope that the virus will not come back again in October. Anyway, we will research and we'll let people know what is going on.
Okay, I think I just have to echo what you have said, and totally agree. And I think this is very interesting. It's very interesting that we can research and find global common perspectives, and yet global different perspectives that is pushed mainly by local contingencies. And I think that is important. And in a final remark, I think it's important that not only we can be able to find what are the global common issues that we have across different urban contexts, but it's very important to find what are the common local contingencies that we have, and common local differences that we have. And I think that this, while it seems like a very difficult thing to do, to relate different urban contexts. I think that this, trying to understand this in a more broad sense, I think this, and especially including peripheral areas and peripheral cities and different economic contexts, I think that trying to understand what is in it in the local contingencies that can relate, not necessarily agree or meaning the same thing, but can relate, can build a conversation around it. I think that this is what really will take us far beyond just globally co-workings are connected because people want to share and stuff, want to share offices. But I think that there are local contingencies that can tell us a lot about how co-working space is not only, as I said in the beginning, is not only a space where people go to work and share an office, but it's very interesting for us to think how co-working space is also a geographic space and urban space that tells a story about a different time, that tells a story about a different period of working organization, of how people and companies and are thinking of collaborative, or think of shared, if not collaborative, but at least at shared ways of organizing themselves, of shared ways of working, and shared ways of promoting social actions and work practice, and therefore spatial practice. So I think it really will add a lot to urban studies to really try to understand what are these new urban scenario that we're going to live now on, not only because of the pandemic, but because of technology, and because of the remote work, and because of everything that builds upon it. And I think that's it. We have a lot of work to do. I think we've done a lot of work already, but there's plenty more work to do. And with that, I think I just have again to really deeply thanks Janet and Ilaria for making the time to be here with us. It was a truly pleasure, truly honor to be here with you. And also thanks to everyone who stayed with us until now. We have a few of us now, but thanks to everyone who participated in this debate here, either in Zoom or either on YouTube. And actually, just a very, I'm gonna close this now, but a very quick message that if you were with us until now on YouTube, please write us an email or on Twitter or whatever you want, but write us feedback, because this was our first live stream on YouTube, and we're still learning how to use it and how to develop this so the next webinars can be more interactive. We can have more people accessing YouTube streams, and we are also open to ideas. And we are also open to, if you want to, okay, I would like to promote a debate, an open seminar on this specific topic. RGCS Open Seminars, they're not only for RGCS members, but anyone that is interested in the issues of collaborative practice, work practice, are welcome to write us and send us an idea and organizing and seminar. And because like we're collaborative, we are open. And again, thanks a lot. So I will disconnect from YouTube now. And for everyone that was on YouTube, thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you, Emannuel. Thank you very much. Thank you, really. Thank you, Janet.
Okay, thank you. We are now off YouTube.
Okay.